to make everything go. For some reason, there's a big delay. So
let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to another Evening With episode of My Whiskey Den, where craft whiskey is king. Patrick is not with us tonight, so I'm going to try to do Patrick's job as well as mine. But before we get too far gone here, we will tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. And as many of you know, we are proud members of the Bar Cart Co-op, which is a collection of friends who create content for the whiskey and other distilled spirits public. The Bar Cart Co-op YouTube and Facebook pages have information about upcoming and past special shows, which happen about every quarter. There have been blind tastings, distiller panels, and discussions of special collaborations, and the usage of unique grains. There's educational and fun episodes for your enjoyment. There was recently an episode about brandy and the yeast experimentation at Wallersheim. That was a couple weeks ago, which was very, very fascinating. We have also the Distillers Talk, which is the oldest show in the group, hosted by Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. It's a conversation with people from distilleries and distillery adjacent that gets into the weeds with their interviews. New episodes arrive at the end of the work week. And if you don't find that to be nerdy enough, there is One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, which is where Alan Bishop answers any questions about distilling and puts them to the test. It could be individual grains, mash bills, equipment, or methodology. New episodes come out randomly, so subscribe. There also is Bourbon Turntable, where they mix the love of music with the love of whiskey. Kevin and Drew have conversations with musicians, writers, distillery folks, and common folks like us about music and whiskey. It releases every Wednesday on all your platforms, including YouTube. There have been many two-part episodes on there with people such as Nancy Fraley, Steve Gorman, who the drummer from the Black Keys, Lenny Eckstein from Deerhammer was recently on there, had a really great two-parter, so please check those out. We also have If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, which is a show about spirits and paranormal among us, as well as the unexplained and the spiritual. Subscribe on Spotify to get all 3 seasons. And last but not least, we have the Whiskey Ring podcast with David Levine, where he interviews people in the industry and industry adjacent who he finds interesting, and he wants to get into the weeds with the guests. So please check that one out. So with that, we want to welcome our guest, Ryan Maybee. Ryan was on here a couple years ago during the wonderful pandemic times. So it's been a little while, and you guys have had some good stuff happen in the past couple of years. But if you could tell us about your history and how much of the history you want to talk about Rieger before we get into what you guys have been up to lately.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. It's good to be back. Yeah, a lot has happened since then. I was trying to remember the last time I was on. It feels like it's been forever, but I know it hasn't been all that long. It's just that so much has happened and lots changed. But brief history, background of J. Rieger is that we were a distillery here in Kansas City, Missouri, founded back in 1887. Became a really big brand, shipped all over the United States. Actually became known as the largest mail order whiskey house in the U.S. So we were shipping direct to consumer. We'd love to get back to that at some point. That would be cool. Grew to become really big, very successful, and then Prohibition put us out of business in 1919, and the brand essentially disappeared for about 90 years. I discovered it. I was a bartender and bar owner in the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009. I was looking to open up my second bar in the Crossroads neighborhood of downtown Kansas City. And that bar was in the basement of a 100-year-old hotel building that just happened to be called the Rieger Hotel. And that had been built by the same family, by the Rieger family. And so as I was researching the history of that building for my business, I stumbled onto the history of J. Rieger and Company whiskey, and that was the first time that that I realized J. Rieger whiskey existed, and that there had ever been a whiskey distillery in Kansas City. So I started to immediately, kind of conceptualize the idea of bringing it back. And in that process, met the great grandson of the founder. His name is Andy Rieger, and convinced him to partner with me and bring back his family's namesake whiskey distillery, which we relaunched in 2014, 95 years after Prohibition put us out of business. So that's the quick and dirty version of the resurrection story. So since then, we just turned 9 years old on October 30th. And it's been kind of a whirlwind ever since then.
So when you guys brought stuff back, I know there was it seemed like a lot of bottles and other memorabilia just seemed to start appearing, and you guys have a lot of that in your visitor center. Are you still, well, one, how did a lot of that come about, and then also, are you still getting some of the old bottles and other memorabilia from back in the day?
Yeah, it's weird. As soon as I lived in Kansas City my whole life, I grew up here. I've been in the restaurant and booze business, ever since I was in high school. And, I never knew about this huge distillery that existed in Kansas City. And then as soon as I did learn about it, it seemed like I just started seeing it everywhere. And those old bottles and old like mailers, printed advertisements, even, old swag like branded shot glasses and a whole bunch of different stuff I started seeing it everywhere. It was in estate sales and flea markets and, vintage antique stores and all over eBay. I mean, there was just tons of it. And so I started, collecting everything that I could. And then absolutely, Andy, once I met him, he had a collection as well that added to it. And it just sort of snowballed from there. But what's interesting is that now we don't really seek it out anymore. We've just got, we've got hundreds of old bottles and, like I said, all the glassware and all that stuff. So we've got so much stuff that we've been able to build a museum, in our distillery. We have a really beautiful 3,000 square foot historic exhibit. And so we don't really hunt for that stuff like we used to, but ironically, we still end up acquiring a bunch of stuff because people just bring it to us. So that's like a regular occurrence, is that now that people know who we are and we have a place where people can visit us, they'll oftentimes just come in and ask for, me or Andy or someone and say, hey, look, I found this thing that feels like it should belong to you. We even acquired the most recent, like really big acquisition is very cool. And it's on display at the distillery, is the original cash register from the original distillery back in the early 1900s. And it's beautiful. It's very ornate, like brass, really just gorgeous, and in like mint condition cash register that was actually custom designed for J. Rieger and Company and used at the original distillery. That's
very cool. So I want to ask you some questions, or if you're talking about your visitor's experience, because it's it used to be with distilleries, everyone just went there. All right, yes, here's a still, here's this, these are, there's where we do the fermentation. Here's grains, have a tasting. There you go. And more of them have become more of tourist destinations. And not only with, well, at least seeing not only your location where you guys have built, it's a great location, but you've really put together quite a destination. So for people that even just they want to go out for nightlife, or some of the events that you've got, watch parties for sporting events and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about some of that?
Yeah, I think the inspiration for that kind of comes from a bunch of different angles. But when we first relaunched the brand 9 years ago, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have a bar. We didn't have regular tours. We didn't have the exhibit, the historic stuff, event spaces, nothing. It was literally, we started, from scratch, just me and Andy. We launched our original Kansas City whiskey with no employees, and we were just trying to make good whiskey. That was the most important thing. back then. Let's build a brand and let's get it out there. Let's distribute it. Let's get it in liquor stores and get people in the habit of seeing it on cocktail menus and asking the bartender for it or seeing it on the shelf. That was a lot more important to us in the very beginning than trying to get people to come to us. But we always knew that eventually we were going to have that. We're going to get to that point. We just wanted to build up to it by building the brand recognition and reputation first and foremost. And now that we did get to that point where we were going to build that guest experience, we just wanted to go all out for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, we're in a not so heavily trafficked area of Kansas City. It's just off the beaten path. I mean, it's kind of on the outskirts of downtown. It's right on the river. It's very close to absolutely everything, and yet it's kind of tucked away in this like weird little corner, this industrial neighborhood that has a lot of history in itself. But it's surrounded by railroad tracks and the river on one side and a bluff on the other, and so it's kind of isolated. And we don't get any foot traffic. People aren't just walking around there. So we figured if we're going to build, an attraction and get people down there, we really had to build something, of some substance and significant enough to get people to make it a destination. And so we kind of went, over the top when it comes to that. It was also largely inspired by its location. We have a really cool building that was finished in 1900 by the Heim family. So back in the 1880s, 1890s, at the same time that J. Rieger was becoming a nationally known whiskey brand in the West Bottoms of Kansas City. In the East Bottoms of Kansas City was the Heim Brewery becoming a national beer brand, like really big. It was a very influential company that also went out of business due to Prohibition, but we are housed in their bottling facility, which was built in 1900. And they also, even way back then, in order to get people to come down there, they built an amusement park just across the railroad tracks from the facility called Electric Park. And this is at a time when, electricity was still relatively new, and, the light bulb was a big thing. And so they advertised having over 100,000 light bulbs. And it was just a really cool, unique experience. They even built their own streetcar line for people to get down there. And it kind of had this amusement park, theme park vibe. And we sort of, took that into consideration when we were building our space as well. So there's a lot of references to Electric Park, and we wanted to kind of create that, adult theme park kind of concept.
Nice. So that kind of weird location where the foot traffic isn't necessarily there or anything like that, did that help inform you of what products you were going to make? Because a lot of times, people start with like the clears, the vodkas, the gins, so they can build their bar with that. But it sounds, you were more concentrated on making great whiskey. Did that play into it at all? Or were you just really into whiskey and just kind of went that route?
Well, with J. Rieger and Company being known as the largest mail order whiskey house in the U.S. back then, we really wanted to embrace that part of it, our history. In the 1800s or even, up until Prohibition, vodka didn't exist. So there would not have been a Rieger vodka back then. But we were known for our whiskey, and we wanted to, revive it that way. It is a struggle, for a startup distillery to say, I'm going to launch right into whiskey, because you've got to wait so many years and invest so much money, in that process, and then hope that, when it's ready to go 4, 5, 6 years later, it's good and you're not completely broke, before you get to that point and you sell your first bottle. But it was really important for our branding to not confuse the customer so much right off the bat by starting with a vodka, starting with a gin. We had to start with whiskey. We had to establish our identity as being a whiskey producer. Adding vodka and gin afterward was also kind of a no-brainer because it is easier to make. You don't have that time, that time constraint. And once we had already established ourselves as a whiskey producer, it was a little easier to kind of pivot at that point as opposed to the other way around.
So my other question is, 6 years. That's a that's a long time. You could have released a lot earlier. You could have released a 4-year-old bottled in bond. Why 6?
It had to be ready. I'm actually drinking our bottled in bond rye right now, which is 6 years old. Both our bourbon and rye are bottled at 6 years. And we committed from the very beginning in 2014 when we were building the distillery that we weren't going to release anything less than 4 years old. And that was just, it sounds like it's kind of an arbitrary number. And to some extent it is. I've had, some good whiskeys that are not quite that old. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of risk with releasing first off, really young whiskeys that are not ready yet. And then there's the method of saying, well, it's going to eventually kind of gradually become older. But then you're talking about not having a consistent flavor profile, from one bottling into the next. And so while the path that we took was the harder path, I think in the long run, it was the smart move, and we certainly don't have any regrets there. When we got to 4 years old, when our first barrels started to turn 4, we got really excited and started tasting them. And we could have, like you said, we could have even done a bottled in bond release right at 4, but we just didn't feel like they were ready. Like we liked them, we knew it was good, we knew we were on the right path. But we just wanted to give it some more time. And by that point, our Kansas City whiskey, which is a blend, has already been established. It's our leading product. At that point, we already had the vodka and the gin out in the Cafe Amaro. So we weren't feeling like an enormous amount of pressure like we had to release those. So we're lucky and fortunate that we were in a position where we kind of had that luxury of saying, well, we're going to release it when it's ready.
When you guys were first working on the bourbon and the rye, did you have a flavor in mind, or did you have a target in mind, as even so much as we don't want it to be this?
Kind of, we took inspiration from a lot of different places, but primarily, the biggest influence over those whiskeys, the bourbon and the rye, would have been Dave Pickerel. So, Dave was a partner of ours in the very beginning. Not just a consultant, but he was a dear friend, and we made him a part of the family. He had equity in the company, and for those of you who are watching, if you don't know who Pick is, he was the master distiller at Maker's Mark for 14 years. He founded Whistle Pig, Hill Rock, and a whole bunch of other brands that he consulted for. He's kind of known as the Johnny Appleseed of the modern craft whiskey movement, and so he was an integral part in our startup as well. So the mash bills, for example, like the bourbon mash bill, 56% corn, 30% rye, 14% malted barley. I mean, all of that was done with Pick in collaboration with him, getting his feedback, getting his guidance. We knew that we wanted to have a high rye bourbon. We knew we didn't want to do a wheated bourbon right out of the gate, maybe later, but we sort of had ideas. But when it came to some of the more subtle nuances about the production methods, he had a lot of influence, like sweet mash versus sour mash, or open top fermentation versus closed fermentation, things like that. The rye that we do, that I'm drinking right now, we knew that we wanted to have a very close to like a Monongahela style rye. So very close, Whistle Pig was 100% rye. Ours is 96% rye, 4% malted barley. We wanted to make sure that it was as, differentiated as possible from the bourbon, instead of a closer type mash bill that's just kind of flipped around. So we wanted to have a really, really rye forward, rye heavy, straight rye whiskey. And that one has been just remarkably well received. And it's still, like, sipping on it now, it still kind of blows my mind, like some of the flavors that we're getting out of it at 6 years old. It's really, really crazy. But yeah, I wouldn't say that we knew right out of the gate exactly what flavor profile we were going to go for in those two, but with working with Pick, we figured out the right thing for us.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. When that rye came out, I did go out. It was on 816 day, which was released. So went out and tried it, and I was I was extremely surprised with the flavor that came out of it because, and this is not knocking any of the bigger brands or anything, but it's one of the reasons that we really like craft whiskey because they tend to embrace methodologies and flavors that other people they don't or just can't because of their scale. And you're able at that age to still the grain comes through in so many good ways that it's carrying that. It's not getting lost in the process. It's not overaged where oak's taking over. And it was it's still I really enjoy that rye. And then when the bourbon came out, it was like they did it again where it was you've got at that age you're still able to carry the flavors out in the grain where it doesn't taste like a Kentucky bourbon or what people are used to getting, or and again, not a knock on it, but it doesn't taste like, oh, you bought barrels from MGP. Because which is, hey, people got to do that. And there's some good things that come out of it, but it was such a nice contrast from that. And yeah, you guys really got a lot of flavors out of those, both the rye and the bourbon.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really, I take a lot of pride in the fact that they are so distinctive and even surprising, at times. I think people can be surprised by the fact that it's a 6-year bottled and bond bourbon or bottled and bond rye from Kansas City. That alone can be a differentiating factor. But when you reference like how they don't taste like Kentucky bourbon or they don't taste like MGPI, I think, something that gets either overlooked or just not talked about enough is terroir in American whiskey. And, I have a wine background prior to doing all this. And, the concept of terroir is widely embraced in just about every winemaking region in the world. It doesn't really get talked about a lot in spirits outside of like tequila or agave spirits. But I do think that there's something to it in American whiskey. And I think we have a really unique setup where we're at here in Kansas City in the East Bottoms, right on the river in kind of a floodplain up against a bluff. We're in sort of this like wind tunnel that creates a lot of circulation in there. And we get extreme heat, hot and cold swings from really hot in the summer, really cold in the winter, which is great for aging in the barrel. And then there's the vibration from the trains that, if you really want to nerd out, like we could get into the theory of how that's affecting the aging process of our whiskeys. But all together, when you take all those things and consider all of them, that's terroir, and that's what makes our place unique and special. And somehow, some way, it is lending itself to the flavor of the whiskeys themselves.
So I love terroir and whiskey. And if you are willing to nerd out or go down the rabbit hole on that just a little more, I would really appreciate it. So you have a Vendome copper still, I read. Is it still the same one from when you started?
Yeah, we've added to it, though. We've expanded our production overall. When we first started in 2014, we had just the one 750-gallon single pot still from Vendome that we used to make all of our bourbon rye. So everything that's in the bottle right now, the bottled and bonds that are 6 years old, would have come off of that pot still, just a single run off that pot still. In 2019, when we expanded into the new space and built, our amusement park, we added a 15-inch column, 27-foot tall 15-inch column, also from Vendome, and we now utilize a 2-part distillation process where we're doing a full run through the column, and then a second run the next day through the pot still, our original 750-gallon pot still. It's a method of distillation that you don't see a whole lot anymore. It may look like a continuous operation, but it isn't. It's 2 separate distillations. Instead of using the pot still as like a thumper or a doubler, we are collecting everything and then redoing it. It's a method that was a little bit more common back in like the 1960s to 1980s and a few distilleries in Kentucky. And it's another one of the brilliant ideas, come up with by Dave Pickerel. So I think, that's lending itself to, the next batch, not next like literal batch, but the next chapter in our whiskeys. When those start coming out, it'll be really interesting to see.
So used to be a cooper, so love to nerd out about barrels. Are you willing to talk about where you get your barrels from and kind of your rick house setup and anything like that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're fully transparent about everything. We utilize all of our barrels come from Independent Stave in Lebanon, Missouri, largest cooperage in the world. All 53-gallon white oak. We don't use any smaller barrels at all. It's all 3-char. And then, the rick house, like I said, it's just a concrete slab warehouse that's got a lot of airflow and absolutely zero insulation. Sorry, it's really brutally hot in the summer and very, very, very cold in the wintertime. And so, those extreme temperature swings are really good for the aging of the barrels. And again, sitting right on the railroad tracks, there's constant like vibration kind of, making its way through the building.
Mind if I ask how tall it is?
It's a single story, but it is 6 barrels high.
Okay.
So in your typical, rick house in Kentucky, you're usually looking at 6 or 7 floors, but for the most part, each floor only has 3 barrels. It's 1 floor, but it's 6 high.
So random question. How fun was it trying to find something that could load barrels 6 ricks high?
Oh, you mean like a fork truck?
So is that what you had to go with? Was a fork truck? Or?
Oh yeah, no, it's not anything special. It's just a forklift and
Okay.
2 able-bodied human beings, to get that job done.
Sorry, I've tried to lift some of those heavy full barrels, and it's just like, I'm not going above 1, much less 2 or 3.
They're a good 500 pounds when they're full.
Yeah. Mike, you got just laughing at me.
Oh no, I'm just picturing you. As you get older, you will never try to do something like that. But when you're younger, you can always lift anything you want. That's why you end up old and debilitated like me. So with I want to go back to the visitor experience, because one of the things that you guys have done recently, and I'd have to say, at least in my experience, done well, was the memberships. And because there's been, some of the big ones like Maker's Mark Ambassador, which is great and fun. There's a lot of interesting things that they send and do for people, especially when you show up. But I've also seen some of them actually very recently that it was I was getting a bunch of things heavily promoted saying, oh, come be a part of this group. And then when it came down to it at the end, it's like, great. So here it is. It's $100 a month. And it's, and it's this, and it's like, oh, wow. and then it went like up from there. But you guys were very understanding. Some people just aren't going to do that, but there's still offerings for all the visitors. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So offerings for all of the visitors. Yeah. I mean, first off, the campus there is sprawling. Like I said, it's like a theme park almost. I mean, we've got 4 bars on site that are all very different in their own way. We've got your kind of typical tasting room bar. So if you like come in and you take a tour, you're going to go through the production floor, bottling line, rick house, all that. And then you're going to end in the tasting room bar where you get you're led through a tasting of our core spirits. That room also can kind of double as like an event space. We can rent it out as well. Upstairs, we have our big, largest gathering space. It's called the Monogram Lounge. A lot of big parties hang out up there. We have more of a full food menu that's like appropriate for, dinner, that kind of thing. Not like, it's not real fancy or upscale. It's not like meant to be a dining experience, but it is a pretty robust menu. And it's huge. We can see like 350 people up there, and that overlooks the production floor. So it's all like encased in glass around the production floor. So while you're up there in the Monogram Lounge, we've got TVs, we'll have games on or whatever, and then you can like just be hanging out there and seeing the bubbling fermenters and the stills and everything. So that's kind of cool. Outside, we have our latest edition called the Electric Park Garden Bar, which is a massive space with its own dedicated bar as well as a dedicated food truck. And that's really like we're really playing up that like theme park atmosphere out there. So frozen drink machines, slushies, things like that. And then the food is more like burgers and chicken fingers and hot dogs and that kind of thing. So we wanted to kind of play up that electric park, that classic amusement park vibe. And then in the basement, the last one is the Hey Hey Club, which is more or less a kind of an homage to my old bar Manifesto, which we shut down during COVID, but was really the spark for all of this. And it's your like cozy, intimate little upscale cocktail lounge. So really beautiful, meticulous attention to detail cocktails in a really loungy and comfortable environment. So you've got all four of those bars on site with a uniquely different experience in each one. And then we've got event spaces. We sometimes will do full building parties, like during Halloween, we did a massive, now second year in a row, we did a massive Halloween party. We have a huge New Year's Eve party that we do each year. That's currently, we're selling tickets right now, and it's filling up fast. So it's a massive space with something for everyone. It's also, even though we're a distillery and we're cocktail focused and spirit focused, it's actually really family and kid friendly. We even have a 40-foot slide that goes from the second floor that lands you right in the gift shop on your way out. So it's a lot of fun.
So you mentioned cocktail bar. Well, first off, slide that lands in the gift shop is the best thing I've ever heard in my life. And like, if I had gone on that as any point in my life, I probably would have just squealed like a kid, whether or not I was one or not. But so your cocktail lounge. So what are your like go-to cocktails just personally?
Well, personally, the horse feather is the one that we're probably most known for. It's kind of a regional Kansas City modern day classic. It originated in Lawrence, Kansas, but it's a real simple drink using our whiskey, the Kansas City whiskey, with ginger beer and Angostura bitters. So a highball, more or less whiskey and ginger. But what really sets it apart is the Angostura in there. Makes a pretty big difference, and that's something that I just love telling the story about. I love sharing it because it's a good drink. It's easy to make. It's very refreshing. It's one of those drinks where I like to use it to convert people to whiskey, because a lot of people, they say, well, I don't like whiskey, or I don't like whiskey cocktails. And, I'll say like, well, why not? Or I already kind of know why, right? A lot of times it's because people associate whiskey immediately with an old fashioned or a Manhattan or something like that. And those drinks are all really strong and sweet, and, you'll like really get after it. But the horse feather is like light and refreshing, a whiskey ginger. You can convert someone from being a Moscow Mule drinker, to the horse feather. So it's a really good drink for that purpose, and it's easy to make at home, any bar. You don't need to be a real skilled, mixologist or whatever to make it. Anyone can make it anytime, anywhere. So I love it for that matter. But otherwise, I mean, being a cocktail nerd and having that in my blood, I don't think that I'll ever be able to. I'll never be able to completely get rid of that. So I do geek out on, weird ingredients and flavor pairings and presentation styles and all that. And that's where we get to kind of have fun with that stuff and get really creative, is in the Hey Hey Club.
So what's the weirdest flavor pairing that you've had that worked really well with Jay Rieger?
Oh boy, weirdest flavor pairing,
or just the most unexpected? We don't have to just throw the weird word out.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know about weird, but my favorite is because I am a Kansas City barbecue fanatic, is to pair burn ends with our whiskey. That's the way to go.
That's a solid choice. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think
Burn
I would
ends
be
from
very
where?
upset. Oh no! Oh no!
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble if I had to pick one. I know there's so much good barbecue in Kansas City, but in my opinion, a sign of really great barbecue is being able to make proper burn ends. That's huge.
Yes.
And a lot of places will not even have burn ends on the menu. You have to ask, and they don't put it on the menu because if it's not good that day, they're not going to do it, right? So that's when you know it's legit, is if they're like, let me check, yeah, I can do burn ends. Then you know it's going to be good. That's
what I've noticed when people come to town, and had a friend in town for Monday Night Football last week, and wanted to do barbecue. It's like, okay, but what do you want? What are you going to order? Because I'm going to give you a different recommendation based on what you're going to order. And he had mentioned one place going there, and he said, "Oh, I go there and get burn ends." It's like, I wouldn't go there for the burn ends. and then, but it's like, but all this other stuff, it's really great. So it's like, figure out what you want to get, and then we ended up with the good all around choice for everything. But there is a difference. I mean, there's definitely a difference for what you're going to get. I don't think there's one that makes everything great. There seems to be something that's not, I don't want to say it's not good, but it's like, yeah, but this one's a little bit better for this, whatever. Even though it's all personal preference, it's pretty hard to get. So I have a question for you regarding the Kansas City whiskey. I think it's one of the first releases of it, and I've never been able to tell that it's numbered or anything. The only thing I could tell is my newer bottle has the Rieger logo on the bottom and the wording's changed on the back. But there's a little difference to it as far as like the flavor and the sherry. And what I've noticed, the older one is both sweeter, but then there's a pepper, kind of like if you've ever put black pepper on a strawberry, where you get that sweetness of that fruit, and then you're like, oh, then you get that pepper hanging off on the front of the tongue. But I was curious, have you done changes to it over time, so you'd know, okay, well, because maybe the sherry had to change or something for the Riegers, or has that had to change over time, or are you still using the same sherry? Or I guess, what did you guys, because you guys got like a really old sherry butt, right? Are you still using that same one?
Well, okay, so first off, this is a really great question. And I love diving into it. I love digging into this. I talk about this a lot. But the one thing that I have to make really clear from the onset is that we don't use any sherry butt like cask in our Kansas City whiskey at all. It's not a sherry cask finish. We're actually adding the sherry to it. And we're using a 15-year Oloroso sherry from Williams and Humbert. And it's just 2% of the final recipe. And that's a style of whiskey that was really common back in the 1880s, 1890s, the actual addition of sherry. And I mean, we could talk for an hour about just how that came about, like why that became common. We could go down that path. But I think what's more interesting is, what we have kind of stumbled onto here with this type of a blend. I referenced earlier about how, what we did with our bourbon and rye, we didn't necessarily take the easiest route to getting it done, right? It's a little bit harder. And the same is easily said about our Kansas City whiskey. We did perhaps the hardest thing we possibly could have done in formulating this blend. It's a blend of 3 different whiskeys. So it's straight bourbon, straight rye, and light corn whiskey, all 3 blended together with the 2% addition of the 15-year Oloroso. Now, when we first did this in 2014, it was all 100% sourced. We were sourcing from both MGPI and Alberta. We were getting the rye from Alberta, the same source that Pick was using for Whistle Pig. That was the rye that was going in to our blend, while the bourbon and the light corn was coming from MGPI. But now, 9 years later, as we have been producing our own bourbon, our own rye, and our own, we do produce light corn whiskey now, and we have been, since 2015. We are starting to blend some of that in to our recipe, right? So while the actual components themselves, while they haven't changed as far as like the categories or types of whiskey, the actual sources have changed. Instead of blending just those three together, we're now blending in our own of each of these. So we actually have like 6 different whiskeys in the bottle because we're still sourcing some and we're adding our own, right? Now, the only thing that hasn't changed at all, and hopefully never will, because I think that would be the most difficult one to make an adjustment for, is the sherry itself. So we import that sherry in bulk and we buy quite a lot of it. And even though it's only 2% of our final blend, it's we buy pretty much every drop that they make in Spain at Williams and Humbert. So what's fascinating about this to me is, I'm going to go back and make another reference to wine. If you're a champagne producer, right, and you have your house style non-vintage brut champagne, and you're a producer like Moet or Krug or someone like that, every year what grapes you're going to be using. You're going to be using some Chardonnay, maybe a little Pinot Noir, maybe even a little bit of Pinot Meunier. But what you don't know every year is you might be buying them from different vineyards, getting them from different farmers, and the climate over that year might have been vastly different than the year before that. And so the results are going to vary. And so while you know what grapes are going into it, you don't necessarily know the percentages. But what's most important is that the master blender makes Krug taste like Krug, or Dom taste like Dom. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the point where we are at now, when we have been adding in some of our own whiskeys as they come of age. Ours taste a little bit different than what we were buying from MGP, or our rye tastes a little bit different from what we were getting from Alberta. But at the end of the day, we know what Kansas City whiskey is supposed to taste like. We've established that, and we use that as a marker. And if we have to make adjustments to the percentages, we do that, and we have done that multiple times to ensure consistency. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure that the consumer doesn't taste and go, wait a minute, that doesn't taste right. That doesn't taste like the Kansas City whiskey that I know. And it is fascinating. I mean, we keep old bottles like from our very first release and through the years, and we will go back and visit. And there have been some points where there was one point in particular where there was a pretty big shift, and we think it was a shift, for the best. And since then, I mean, it has been remarkably consistent, even when we've had to make adjustments.
So do you think there will ever be like a big shift years down the road where you basically, leave out the MGP or the Alberta or whatever, and you go to exclusively the stuff that you're making, or are you going to try and...
I think that's unlikely. The reason is that, every barrel of bourbon rye essentially that we take out of our inventory that goes into the Kansas City whiskey label, into this label, takes away from our bottled and bond. So if we grow our bottled and bond rye, our bottled and bond bourbon, we want to make sure that we're producing enough to satisfy that demand. And every barrel that we take and we put into our Kansas City whiskey blend, we got to find that balance and that harmony. So there's that business side of it there, trying to make sure that we have enough, for all of our expressions, and then also ensuring the consistency in the flavor profile.
That's fair. So, random question. what has been, so when you're trying to blend those, right? Every time you get something new, it's new and it tastes different. What is the thing with the most variance? Is it the bourbon? Is it the rye? Is it the light whiskey? Or is it the sherry, where you'll just, try to make the blend and you'll be like, what did they do this time?
The sherry has been, I mean, they've been doing it for hundreds of years, and so it's amazingly consistent. So we don't really ever have to worry about that. But when it comes to, we buy the other whiskeys in large quantities, 500 or 1,000 barrels at a time. So we buy, lots of barrels at a time, and we go through a really, really meticulous vetting process where we get samples from different lots, that were made on, distilled on and barreled on different days. We taste them, and we make sure that we're getting the best possible quality in each one. We don't just accept what they send to us. We vet them out and we approve them and say that's what we want. And then we keep an eye on it. In fact, we still, we don't always have, if we buy 1,000 barrels, we don't have them all shipped up to us immediately. We can leave them there at MGPI or wherever, and keep an eye on them over the time and taste them. So there's quite a few steps in that process, but the cool thing is I think we're getting better at it. It's one thing that I have, over the last couple of years especially, really grown to enjoy, is this process of vetting the quality of these barrels and the characteristics of these barrels and using them to formulate blends. And we have a really, really small panel of people that are a part of that process. Myself and our master distiller, kind of lead the process with a very, very small group that blind taste all of these things and give feedback. And so that we can reach a consensus and make sure that we're on the right track.
So about how big do your batches end up being to maintain consistency?
Oh, roughly 3,000 gallons, roughly.
That's nice. All right, sorry. I love this. It's just, I've heard some stories about some bourbon from certain places where you'll be like, oh, this is great. We think we've got it dialed in. And then you get something weird happened on like a day with a fermenter or something like that. And you just get a real not off flavor wise, but different than usual batch. So I didn't know if that was going to happen to y'all. Okay, sorry. Mike?
All right, so I've got a question. Your gin, which is really good, by the way, is that I'm not a gin person, historically not. Horrible experiences with it. And then we had a gentleman from Dancing Goat, Wisconsin, talked about the Death's Door gin, which is hard to say when you're not having anything to drink, and even harder when you are. but he's like, no, try this one. It's not overly botanical and overly this, and tried that. And that was the first one. It was like, okay, gin can be good. The second one was Rieger's gin. And I know there's a very good reason why yours is good, because of, what went into it. Which if you do, if you want to get into that would be great. But I'll let you answer that first, because I was wondering if that leads into my next question. But if you want to talk about your gin, that would be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the most important thing about our gin is that it was made by Tom Nickel of Tanqueray. So he's was someone I had met prior to starting this venture, just through my time as a bartender and bar owner. And he's a rock star, man. I mean, he was a rock star even back then. The guy worked for 42 years at Tanqueray. It's all he ever did. Started when he was 17 years old, pushing a broom in the warehouse. Eventually worked his way up to becoming the master distiller. And he was the master distiller in the 1990s when he created Tanqueray Number 10. So that was his baby. And Tanqueray Number 10 is the most awarded gin in history. It's literally been retired and put in the Hall of Fame because it is the most awarded gin in history. He also resurrected a lot of the old handwritten recipes from Charles Tanqueray himself from the 1830s and 1840s. So like Bloomsbury gin, Tanqueray Malacca, the Old Tom recipe from Tanqueray. So Tom was responsible for bringing those back. So he's an absolute legend, and we brought him on as a partner as well in 2015 when we launched our gin. And so he formulated it. He has been it's his recipe that he has been mentoring our master distiller Nathan Perry on, and teaching him the subtle nuances of gin making. Gin is, I say this a lot, but it's true. I mean, if we didn't have someone like Tom, we probably would not have made a gin. Making gin is hard. I mean, making vodka is super easy. Making whiskey is relatively easy once you kind of are shown how, or you figure it out. It becomes pretty much, rinse and repeat routine until you get to the, more or less to the blending part of it. But gin is different. Gin is really an art form, and it has to do with not only the selection of the botanicals, but the understanding how they interact with each other, chemically speaking, scientifically speaking. How you actually introduce them to the spirit in the still. Whether you're putting them in the pot with the liquid, or if you're using vapor distillation, or all these different things. It's really, really complicated. And Mike, a lot like you, I think a lot of people have had very bad gin experiences, because there's a lot of really bad gin out there, and we were not willing to take that risk and have it tarnish the reputation of the Rieger brand. So without Tom, we wouldn't have made a gin, and we're really fortunate to have him on our team. He's the best gin distiller in the world. And it was our goal with our gin to make the best London dry gin made in the United States, which no one was really doing, at the time. Everyone was trying to make something different and weird, getting away from that juniper forward, classic traditional London dry style. We said we wanted to make that. We want to make the best London dry gin in the United States, and that's what we did.
Yeah, have you guys won any awards with it, or gotten any recognition?
Oh my God, this year we never really tried to win a lot of awards. We didn't. We were kind of stubborn about that for the first many years of our company, because we weren't trying to chase medals and use that as our marketing, right? But this year we said, all right, we're growing, we're getting bigger. We need to get some of this stuff to help us with the marketing aspects of the business. And so we entered 3 of the more renowned competitions, and we did very, very well, across the board. The San Francisco Spirits Competition, gin won double gold and was up for best in show. The bourbon won double gold and was a top 3 finalist for best in category out of 500 bourbons. And then both the rye and the Kansas City whiskey both got gold. So we kind of swept that, and then the same thing repeated with the other awards as well. And it's it's had a ton of press. I would say maybe the gin's had a lot of press. It's gotten a lot of really crazy high scores. A lot of publications have written about it. I wouldn't necessarily say that stuff. I don't really know if it helps us sell it or not. At the end of the day, it needs to taste good, and we need to get it. We need to get people having it behind their bars, using it in cocktails, and tasting it. But it is nice to have those accolades for sure.
Yeah, and it's one of the things too that with like you said, you can make gin and put it out. You don't have to age it, which is great. But I think when you also get, I think there's a lot more people like me who've had the horrible gin experiences, and I've always said my experiences were people giving me gins that smelled and tasted like my great aunt's perfume, or you're walking past a perfume counter at the mall. There's just way too much going on. Nothing meshes well together. There's just way too much. And you can have 18 botanicals in there if they work together well, but a lot of them just don't.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the biggest downfalls with the whole modern new Western gin category is everyone's trying too hard, trying to do too many things. Do you really need 18 botanicals? Do you need 25 botanicals? Where do you stop? And at what point is it? Are you not detecting everything? I think one of the beauties of our gin is that there's 5 botanicals, right? And it's like a rock band. It's like you got your drummer, you've got your bass, you got your bass note, you've got your guitar, keyboard, and lead singer, and they all play a really important part. You take any one of them away, and it doesn't sound quite right. But all five of them together play off of each other and work together in harmony, and it's really, really important. So there's some real beauty in that simplicity of staying focused on a small amount and getting the most out of them.
Okay, so my follow-up with that, because when I was there a couple weeks ago and I saw this and I thought, well, okay, I have to try this, and then I also have to find out if there's a history, but I picked up the absinthe.
Oh,
so
yeah.
What made you guys do that? But was there ever a history in Rieger's history of making an absinthe?
I haven't seen anything historically that suggests that we were doing one back then. It's interesting. I mean, when Prohibition finally put us out of business in 1919, we had over 100 products. So while a lot of it was whiskey, we did a lot of other things too. We did like fruit brandies and all kinds of different things. But I don't think I've ever seen an absinthe. Absinthe is something that I personally really like. And when we launched the brand in 2014, we knew we were doing our whiskey. That was going to be our flagship. After that, we were kind of just throwing some ideas at the wall, like, what else are we going to make? And we actually, back then, the idea to have an absinthe was, it was probably in the top 3 or 4 options. The reality is that it's two things. One, it's hard to make too. It's a botanical spirit, just like gin, right? So really, 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 really hard to make and figure out with, a couple hundred years of tradition in places like Switzerland and southern France. But outside of there's not a lot of people who know how to make absinthe, right? Like, as much as I would like to say I could, I can't. And our head distiller, he was, kind of new to this as well. So it was one of those things where you don't really know what we're doing, if we're going to make an absinthe, one. And then two, there's no denying the fact that it is a loss leader from the amount of time and money that goes into making it. And if you're lucky to sell some, it's like you sell one bottle to a bar and they just don't go, you're not going to go through it like whiskey or gin or vodka, because you're using dashes at a time in a couple of drinks. So, there's just not a lot of money to be made there. So we didn't do it initially. Now, 9 years later, we just came out with that like a year ago, something like that, because we never really entirely let go of the idea. And Nathan, our master distiller, he's really getting to a point where he's like come into his own as a master distiller. And so he's doing a lot of experimenting as a lab, where he's distilling, a lot of individual botanicals and understanding the science of, how they react in distillation, how the flavors change, all those types of things. And I mean, he must have gone through, I think, well over 100 iterations of that absinthe until we finally settle on that one that you've got in your hand there. And it's only available at the distillery. We usually have a few options that are available there as like a tasting room exclusive. So it's something that we've made there that we're having some fun with. It's allowing us some creative freedom, but it's also we're not making enough of it to have to like put a lot of energy behind distribution or anything like that. It is good though. I think it turned out great.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's absinthe is not something that you jump right into and have a lot of, but it is I really like the flavors of it a lot. I was probably more impressed when I first saw the bottle that you did it at an appropriate proof. Because it's 67 and a half. So, I mean, that's like, yes, that's the way you do it, because you're not doing shot. Well, if you're doing shots of absinthe, you got some other problems, but, or you will soon have some problems if you're doing those. But yeah, that's the whole point. You do it right and let it get proofed down and proof down with water and if you add the sugar or not. But I haven't done a loosh with it yet. I've just done some little sips of it, and I put a couple drops and stuff. But I'll hopefully have some time here pretty soon that I can do that and try it out that way. But I thought it was very tasty. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I like it a lot too. And all those things were taken into consideration. The ABV, absinthe historically and by definition is very, very, very high proof. Typically in that, 65 to even up to 75% alcohol, which is why, historically you're going to mix it with water and then add sugar because it's so bitter to kind of balance it out. It does loosh as it should. So I'm always suspect of for a while there before absinthe became legal again. There were a whole bunch of knockoffs coming from like Eastern Europe, like, Czech Republic and places like that they didn't loosh because it was artificial coloring. It was like, fake coloring that was added to it instead of the coloring coming from the green anise, which is done, as a post distillation macerate. And that those oils in there are what activate with the water and cause that to happen. So it's all made, it's made according to those standards, and it does loosh, and it's pretty magical. It's a cool thing to see.
That's awesome. I don't think people understand how hard that is.
Right.
But I'll also throw out what people don't understand. Like San Francisco double gold gets thrown around a lot. So the way you make double gold at San Francisco is the entire panel of judges has to award you gold. So literally everyone has to agree that this is spectacular. Not just good, not just great.
And it's all done blind. It's all done. It's a blind tasting where each judge does their own analysis and evaluation of each spirit. And then they'll collect those results and they'll go back. And if I think each table or each set of judges is like a dozen or maybe 10, something like that. And if it's something like 75% of the judges say have gold and, there's maybe a couple silvers, they'll go back and reevaluate and then determine, is everyone going to give it gold? And we all agree. And if they do, then it gets double gold. And it's something like 2% of all of the entries get awarded a double gold, something like that.
Not a lot. So congratulations. That's
not
easy. Also,
Thanks.
Distribute to Kentucky, but not too much, just enough for me to get some. That's
right.
What we're really into, right? Because we're just filled with buttholes, so they don't need the good stuff.
Yeah, I know a mule, Mitch. I can.
Yeah. I need to get to Missouri eventually again.
That's true. There's that too, but yeah. But
why did y'all have to put Kansas City on the other side of the state, though? That's the problem.
To stay away from St. Louis.
That's the best answer. Okay.
Yeah. I have no ill will towards St. Louis, so that's fine. So I'm curious if you, assuming you're keep going strong with the bottled and bond rye and the bottled and bond bourbon, you have anything else that you're coming out with that you can say that you're coming out with?
Yeah, this next year is going to be pretty big for us. 2024 is going to be huge. We are coming out with a couple of new things. I'm not gonna give it away just yet, but we do have two new marks that will be released this upcoming year that we're excited for.
Any tasting room exclusive things that that are coming out that you can talk about, or nope?
Probably. I mean, we've even tinkered around with like a little bit of rum here and there. We currently have the Sip and Santa concept going over the holidays at the Hey Hey Club, which is a rum heavy cocktail concept. So we have some rum blends that we're doing, and they turned out really well. So we might see one of those turn up as a tasting room exclusive. But the best way to stay on top of it is we have a weekly newsletter that goes out with all the kind of new stuff happening, events that we're doing, tastings. We do a lot of education. This is a lot of what I do most of the time is leading tastings and seminars educational events and things like that. So we've got that. That's a good way to kind of keep apprised of what's going on. But yeah, we should have some exciting things happening next year for sure.
That's awesome.
Okay. So one last thing, or well, I guess towards the end here. So upcoming for a few people that we haven't said it out loud. So this weekend I'm going up to Green Bay, Patrick's neck of the woods, because the Kansas City Chiefs are taking on the Green Bay Packers. So we're going to do a Kansas City versus Wisconsin tasting, and Jay Rieger has provided Kansas City whiskey and a rye, which are going to go up against a couple of other ones. Let me pull up some of Patrick's artwork here. So he's got from Kansas City area we're doing, or not Kansas City, Missouri. Not doing cities, we're doing states. But yeah, we have Edelbrand brandy, which is going to go up against some Wallersheim brandy. And then we've got Jay Rieger, which is going to go up against Jay Henry. Battle of the Jays, I guess you'd want to call it. But that should be pretty interesting because it's Jay Henry's rye that just came out versus Rieger's rye. So we're going to do blind tasting for everybody, and then we'll have a tally, and the unofficial winner will be what predicted the winner of the game. And hopefully it comes out in the right favor. But also we'll be telling everyone about all the spirits too, so they can get to it, find things as they can. You guys have a decent distribution, but you're online with a few places too. But that's one thing I found very interesting is that it really didn't seem to take too long when you just had the Kansas City whiskey that it wasn't just in Missouri. You guys, you kind of you had it available, which is that's your reach is a lot further than many other distilleries. I mean, I know you've been at it for 9 years, but you seem to get the distribution out pretty early.
Yeah, we probably we expanded distribution a lot faster than we initially thought we would. We're so very, very much committed to, owning our backyard, so to speak, Kansas City and Missouri, of course. And that still represents to this day 75% of our total sales revenue. But we are in 27 states officially, and we're also in 4 countries overseas, and that is expanding next year as well. And while all that's really nice, and it's really cool and exciting to see, our whiskeys on the back bar in Paris or other really cool cities and great places here in the States, none of it means as much as being able to really own Kansas City and be synonymous with Kansas City and make sure that we're a Kansas City brand. I like that lineup that you showed. I didn't know the other brands that you're going to be tasting next week, but I know Jay Henry well. I've met those guys several times. We actually are with the same distributor in a lot of states, so I've had a lot of opportunities to work with them. They're great. I like those whiskeys.
Yeah.
I like
nice
that
people
family.
too.
They're very, very lovely people. Yeah, it's really cool. And then Edelbrand, I'm very close with Lynn from Edelbrand. She's a big part of the Missouri Craft Distillers Guild, which we're also involved with. And those brandies are spectacular. Like Germany, Austria level spectacular. Like that.
Yes.
And people just don't know. I mean, what they're doing there, it's so cool.
And they are the brandies are just so clean and yet have so much flavor to them, but they're distilled beers too are just we had a great time with them, and they give us because when we talk to Lynn, it's like, what do you want to go head to head, because you're going to have the Wisconsin sweet tooth with their brandies and what they're used to, and so she gives us their pear apple brandy. But we did see, which also, place we talk about a lot, Sealbox, because they can get craft whiskey out to a lot of people, but Edelbrand now has tasting kits on Sealbox, and it's several of their brandies with a couple of the grappa glasses as a kit. So if you're looking for gifts for anybody, go to CO Box and support Edelbrand, because they play nice little place like that. I mean, they're just, we just heard of them because they got interviewed on one of our sister shows, and our friend Alan is a huge brandy and Swiss distillation nerd, and he was talking with the whole family was there. It's like, oh, we got to talk to these people. And then Lynn was in town. She comes to Kansas City like a lot. So she was in town doing tastings. And so I went down there 2 days in a row. And then the next week when she's back there and I've gotten to know them very well. And again, super nice people. And it's going to be very interesting. That brandy versus Wisconsin sweet brandy, flavor versus sugar.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that bad and negative about Wallersheim. It's just,
it's going to be tough, because I looked at one side and I was like, they're totally going to win. And then you look at the other side and you're like, no, they're totally going to win. And then you look at the other side and you're like, but they might win. And then you're like, but they might. Oh,
yeah. We're not letting people shoot it for shots. And when I told Lynn that, she said, you let me know if anyone shoots my brandy, because if they do, she goes, I'm going to come down there and hit them. It's like, well, that's very violent from a nice lady.
Yeah, right.
But I appreciate her sentiment. So, but no, it should be very interesting and pretty good challenges against all good distilleries and stuff. So it should be a fun time.
Absolutely.
So, well, Mitch, you have any other questions for Ryan?
Not really. It's a little past an hour, which I know we try to wrap up around there, and I don't want to nerd out too hard, because if I do, it'll go much past my bedtime, unfortunately.
Well, we'll just have to get you to come to town, and then we'll go down there.
Come to Kansas City and show you around the distillery, answer all your questions.
That sounds fun.
Right.
And you can go down the slide.
That sounds really fun. There's an inner 6-year-old in here somewhere that is just freaking out right now, and I'm doing the best I can to contain it.
It can hold a man.
I mean, thank God, because I weigh 1.5 of those. So,
yeah, it should be pretty fun. But we definitely appreciate your time, and we appreciate the donations to the challenge. And again, hopefully the center of the country will become victorious over the upper Midwest this coming weekend. But it should be fun no matter what. It should be a good time. So, all right. Well, nothing further to add. Ryan, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And please go out and look for. What's this year's holiday release?
The holiday. You mean like the holiday label Kansas City whiskey?
Or when the monogram comes out, it's fall holiday-ish, right?
Monogram is out. Yes, okay. It is available. And this one is really special. I say that every year. But this one is really, truly more special than the other ones. We've actually changed it a little bit. This is the one that actually is aged in the 100-year-old sherry boats, as that you were talking about earlier. So this is now a Kansas City whiskey, like our flagship Kansas City whiskey, but that has further Solera aging in multiple 100-year-old sherry botas. So it's really, really special. It's really unique, very limited, hand-numbered bottles. Only 2,000 of them made, and this is available now.
I call myself a sherry slut, so I might have to go out there and try and get a bottle or two of that.
We got a mule. We can get you taken care of. So, all right. Well, with that, nothing else to add. Again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in. As always, support your craft distilleries. Find them online. Rieger's does have sources for where to get their stuff online if you are outside of normal channels. But please look them up. Support craft whiskey. Support flavors. And as Patrick says, it's not the size of the den that matters. It's the love of whiskey. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.